Hello everyone. I've just joined on my phone because my computer decided to reboot, but luckily we have enough technical alternatives to still make it work. I see that this recording or this meeting is being recorded. That's fine by me, but maybe it'd be a good idea if everyone kind of also consents to that, since we're going to be doing a lot of talking, and hopefully you're going to participate a lot as well. I wanted to start, since we're with quite a small group, I wanted to start with kind of introductions and everyone just explaining how much debate experience they have and what they want to learn about extensions and second halves. So it'd be a good idea if everyone kind of turns on their microphone, turns on their camera, and tells us something about themselves. And also to make sure that the training actually helps you and kind of caters to what you want. So is there anyone who would like to start with that?
Yeah, that's very nice.
Okay. So is there anything you want to learn specifically, or? Okay, so Suleika can't talk. I don't know how many people are in the room. So no one wants to introduce themselves? Okay, that's fine. I'll introduce myself. My name is Emma. I am a Euro CA. I'm from the Netherlands, and I guess, I don't know if you want debate TV, but I've done a bunch of competitions, and I won Euros recently, and I lost a lot of ESL finals. So that's my CV. I'm usually a whip speaker, but since this is about prepping extensions and second halves, hopefully this will still be very useful, and you'll still have a lot coming from this. But that means that sometimes I might not focus on how to write the analysis, but more on how to put it into the debate and how you put an extension into the debate. I see that there's another person who joined. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell me what you... Aw, that one was fast. Okay, well, I think we're with just a couple of people, so I hope everyone can participate and stuff like that. Okay, my computer just rebooted, so I'm just going to join it via a laptop. And then we can start. I'm not using a PowerPoint because we're with quite a small group. And I don't think that it would be very useful for the participation, but I'll post a PowerPoint at the end of the meeting and at the end of the training. Okay, I'm just switching. I muted myself. Wow, that was such a boomer move. But let's start with the first thing. So I think the first thing that is important to discuss is what extensions actually are, because I think very often you start debating and then there's kind of this first way of explaining an extension, and people just tell you, well, you have to add something to the debate. So for the first couple of years that people are doing debates, very often they will just bring something new. And they will try to come up with an argument or something else that has not been said yet. And that's the way they try to improve on the debate, or that's the way they try to add to the debate. But actually, I don't think that's a very good definition of an extension, because I think what an extension actually should be is it should be it should extend the debate, so it should focus on what the debate actually needs. So that's why I don't think that you can completely prep an extension, and I'm kind of very skeptical about the idea that you can prep an extension during prep time before you have heard the debate, because you don't know what the debate needs at that time. So you won't be able to just come up with an extension in a vacuum, not only because you don't know what the first half is going to say, but you also don't really know where the debate's going to go. Of course, when you get better, you're going to be able to kind of come up with things that opening half will probably talk about, and that means that it's it's very likely that you are going to improve the ability that you have to already come up with an extension in prep time. But I think in general, the most important thing of an extension is that you keep being flexible and you think of what the debate needs rather than what you want to say or something new that you think you could add. So it's not about who adds the most, but it's about who brings the debate further and who actually helps the debate improve the most. I think a good extension has two things. So one, I think a good extension is you're able to summarize that within a sentence, maybe two sentences if it's a really complicated extension. But I think the most important thing there is that immediately you know when judges have the conversation, okay, what did opening government says? Usually there's like three arguments that are very clearly, or two arguments that opening government made that are clear, and then opening opposition said something that's also quite clear, and then the extension is kind of vague, like, well, they added a little bit of on this argument, they added a little bit on that argument, they gave some context, they gave some framing, but they didn't, like, it's not very clear what they added to the debate. So if you're able to summarize your extension very quickly to either say, oh, well, they brought this new point, they brought in this new group, they brought in this new principle, they brought whatever, I think that makes an extension a lot better. And I think that's also one of the things people often do wrong with extensions. People don't focus enough. So people want to add a little bit everywhere, and not making a choice is usually the wrong choice, because it means that you're very unlikely to add because you're going to add a little bit there and a little bit there. But if you're able to summarize your contribution within one sentence, I think that usually means your extension becomes a lot better and you're a lot more likely to have a high quality extension, and you're a lot more likely to have the judges weigh you correctly, because I think one of the most frustrating things is when you add all of these things and you've spoken for a while and you add on that argument, but the judges are just like, well, we didn't really see your contribution. So I think that being able to summarize your extension in making sure that it's focused and it's kind of finished and you're able to summarize it in one sentence is very important. And then I think the second thing about an extension is that it's very important that you're immediately able to put it in the debate and that it's clear how it fits within the debate. And since very often people don't think of that too much, you get the, oh, I said something new, but that doesn't matter. It's not about turning how many arguments opening government made and how many arguments closing government made. It's about whether you're able to do it better and you're able to bring the debate a lot further. And I think that means that you have to put it into the debate. So you immediately have to make clear how it fits within the other arguments and how you should weigh it against other arguments. And that responsibility really lies, or I think the responsibility doesn't solely lie within second half, but I think the responsibility kind of falls mostly with the second half to weigh against other teams, because obviously other teams didn't hear your extension yet, so they weren't able to defend themselves. So that means that it's very difficult for them to weigh their arguments against your arguments, but it's really up to you to put it into the debate and to make sure that it's clear how it should be weighed and it's clear how it should be viewed. So that's on what the goal of an extension is. And I think that is quite important because I see very often people being super frustrated because they say, well, I said a new thing and still I took a third. Or people being very frustrated because they feel like their extension isn't taken into account enough and the judges aren't picking up on every single line of analysis that they're adding. So I think being able to summarize it in one sentence and making sure that you immediately put it into the debate is one of the important things there. And thinking about what the debate actually needs and therefore being flexible. So I think that brings me to how you actually come up with an extension. So during prep time in first half, I'm not really sure what you do, but usually the way me and my team partners do it, we kind of talk about what the clashes are going to be. We talk about what the different arguments are that we could run. And then after 5 or 10 minutes, the first speaker goes write that argument. And I kind of wander off and I think about possible rebuttal and stuff like that. So I don't really have to spend we don't spend that much time talking because quite clearly we're like, quite fast, we're like, okay, this is probably an argument, that's the argument, okay, this is what we're going to run. That is opposite of what we do in extensions, because when we run extensions, I think usually we talk for 15 minutes because we can't prepare yet because we don't know what first half's going to bring. And we want to make sure that we prepare and kind of talk through the debate, because obviously it's not very easy to communicate in second half because the debate's going on and you can't really discuss that much. So it's extra important that you have discussed trade-offs or ranking of extensions and kind of thinking what's going to happen there. So on the first thing, I think the first thing that we do is we discuss all of the arguments that could possibly fit within the debate, and that is as broad as possible. So that means we'll usually go through all of the actors. So in this house would ban drugs, we'll talk about users, we'll talk about addicted users, we'll talk about the sellers or criminals, we'll talk about the rest of society, maybe we'll even talk about medical professionals, we talk about people who are the victims of the criminals who sell drugs. So we very broadly kind of think about all of the groups that might be relevant. And then very often you kind of see groups, so people who are addicted and people who are users are very likely to be kind of linked together. Those people who are criminals and the victims or the rest of society are probably linked together in some way. So that already gives you some idea of different arguments that you can run. Then I think the second thing we very often do is we split these groups even more. So in this house would ban drugs. Maybe some criminals are kind of, this is probably a very Dutch perspective, but some criminals are kind of standing on the corner and selling weed or something else. And some criminals are like hardened criminals who import heroin and cocaine and do horrible things. But they are very different players in kind of different groups. So that's also very easy. And I think the same goes for politics, where very often you have different types of groups. You have like the Republicans, you have the Democrats, but then you have the diehard left-wing Democrats, you have the people who are kind of on the fence, people who don't vote. So there's often very kind of specific groups within the actors. I think the third thing we do is we think about long-term impacts, because I think there's a tendency very often in first half you'll focus on the very short-term impact. So you'll say, well, if we ban drugs or if we legalize drugs, we think that's going to lead to XYZ kind of in the next couple of months. If we legalize drugs, for example, more people are going to use drugs. Sure, but what's going to happen in the long term once drugs have normalized, once people are used to the responsibility of using drugs? I think that is likely to kind of also bring new perspectives and make sure that you come up with new extensions. And then I think the fourth thing that very often we think about is trade-offs or principles, and we think of the different rights that people have that might be part of the debate. So again, this has would ban drugs. Maybe there's a right to be safe, but there's also a right to make decisions freely. There's a right to be protected by your government, but is like that right also stops somewhere. So you have the right to do things that you like you have the right to drink alcohol. So there's, and maybe in this house would ban drugs. I don't think principles are the most important, but I think very often like principles do play into it. And even if the principle that you're thinking of is not something that you're necessarily going to run, I think principles very often, again, bring a new perspective. So often after that kind of list that you go through, and I don't go through the list very explicitly anymore, but those are just all of the things that I kind of go through in my head to make sure that I get a lot. Like I also think are there any examples? So if you're thinking about this house would ban drugs, I think the Netherlands used to be kind of the example of why banning drugs might not be a good idea or might be a good idea, depending on what you think of the country. Now you might think of, I think, California, New York, like there's a bunch of places where people have legalized drugs. So you think of the examples and what happened there and what you saw, like you might think of the prohibition time in the US. I have no idea, but think of examples because those examples will also often give you new perspectives and give you new ideas. And other things we think about, I think we think about the context in which it happens. So banning drugs, like what is that going to look like? Does that mean you punish people for a very long time? Do you lock someone up who smokes weed for once? Or is it more about banning or kind of prosecuting the people who sell drugs? Like all of that kind of scenario work or context you also think about. So that gives you a very broad perspective of what's going on in the debate. This usually takes me and my team partners like 5, 6, 7 minutes, and we just come up with as much as we can. Dumb ideas don't exist. Well, they exist, but normally they don't exist, and we kind of think very broadly and think whatever we want and kind of try to come up with as many points as possible. So we do that 2 minutes. At the beginning of prep, we think for 2 minutes ourselves, quiet time. And then for a couple of minutes we speak, and then you usually kind of bounce off each other, and then you get more and more points. And then you have a bunch of points, which I think is ideally where you want to start digging into those points and start prioritizing them. But I think in order to practice this, because I think it's important to kind of immediately practice, I was thinking we could do a prep quickly. So I thought I'll give everyone kind of like 5 minutes to come up with as many points as they have about emotion, and then we'll discuss and we'll see what you came up with and what else you could come up with. So are there any preferences that you have on what type of motion you want to prep?
Yeah, we are ready.
Okay, so no preferences on the type of motion?
Well, probably not something that complicated as international relations or something.
I would never said international relations. That's not something I would like either. Okay, so yeah, I think the motion that we're going to do is streaming. So streaming means that from elementary school, you separate kids who do really well in school, who don't do very well in school, and kind of put them into separate classes and adapt education to their level. And we're going to be closing government, and everyone just gets, let's say, 5 minutes. I think 5 minutes is fair, to say this house supports aggressively streaming at the age of 7. Is that motion clear to everyone?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, cool. So I'll set a timer for 5 minutes and just come up with as much as you can, thinking about those actors, the long-term principles.
I'm sorry, can you please write in chat about motions?
Okay, that was 5 minutes, give or take. So does someone want to share everything that they came up with? Masha, do you want to share?
Yeah, I think I can. I'm just summarizing everything. Okay. So a couple of things I've came up with. First of all, the 2 main actors, which I highlighted, is the kids who actually lag behind and show worse results than others. And the other case and actors are the kids who learn faster. So basically, the main point here is to prove why it's better for both of these groups. We can actually find other actors in this debate, like the parents, how it influences them and their attitude towards their children, or the educational system as a whole. However, the first two I find the most important. And concerning a couple of things about those who lag behind, the first thing why it's good for them is because we have an individual approach. It means that they're more likely to learn fast the information they acquire at school. The second thing here is they don't feel actually excluded or somehow undeveloped because they don't see the kids who are like the best and the brightest, and they believe that they are also capable of achieving something. And also we can analyze how it impacts these kids in the long-term perspective, like how actually their attitude towards them in school influences their long-term success. On the example, for example, of the Pygmalion effect, when your expectation towards kids actually becomes true. And why it's better for those who learn fast? Well, a couple of things here. First, they are not being bullied. This is actually I think it's quite important because the main people and students who show violence in school are those who feel like jealous of those who are better than others, and they start like teasing them and stuff like that. There is no such thing here because all the children are equal basically in the schools, and everyone learns better than everyone learns quite good. The second thing here is that more attention is paid to this group of children, and it's actually important for those who learn fast and who want to achieve something, that the feeling that they're actually acknowledged for their achievements. Because in the status quo, like in a lot of school, the attention is paid to each student, even for those who lag behind, and somehow the children who study a lot and contribute a lot into the education, they don't feel this feeling of success. Thus, more attention to them, they feel more motivated, and also again this individual approach. The same works as the first for the first group. And the last thing here I would like to mention is actually not wasting some time for this children who lag behind, because often in schools we motivate the children who like study very like delighted, right? And we motivate them to help other kids, and thus it also somehow wastes their time, which they could have contributed to developing their own skills. So I guess this is it.
Well done. That's already quite a lot. Would you feel comfortable that you would have an extension in the debate?
I think so.
Are there others? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No.
Are there others that want to add to that have new things? Because I don't think I heard anything about the principles yet. And I think there's also a little bit about the context that you could still use.
Well, I think in these motions we should about say moral rights. States have responsibility for children for adaptation in this world, because we have one of the problem about the dangerous when it can be a problem in the future, and the equality it must have and most important for these people, because these guys understand how we can very good for competition, how we can very good adaptation in this world, and understanding to the training coaches for a new personal education. Why I think about the moral rights, but what about the frame? Why we have the ages of 7? The children, the age of the 7, now having doubts about life, more sincerity, and we have to the why we have no to the doubts, because we have to the all this information from people about the capitalism, about the personal education, about the from parents, the guys to the most sincerity in this world, and this can they want to life to the be to a doctor, be to the pilot, to be to the medical system, for about the coaching. It's very to the sincerities interested for this age of the 7, and out of this we can understand, okay, it's new relations, it's new choices for you, and we can do the adaptation about this. And in this new education about the development for him personal, we can understand the new personal program, and we have combined it about the people. And what is more specifically, we have noticed about the say about two groups, to most adaptive and to neuroadaptive. We talked about the all people, all children, because the basis to basically for personal him, we can understand how it is very good for him, and we have to the more people, and not to delete it to the other groups, and it's not very good for debating, because to the other side can to say we have to the small people about the same to the heavy personal rights. We can pursue about to the all people in this motion. I think that.
Yeah, I think that's a good addition. I think it's also important indeed to talk about when you're going to do that and why the age of 7 is so important. I was also thinking things like, for me, I think there's a principle or like a discussion to be had. Do you want to have everyone come out of the school system knowing all of the basics? So everyone can read, everyone can do math, everyone kind of has basic history, a little bit of English, a little bit of whatever other language is regionally important. And after they graduate when they're 18, like all of them have at least the basic skills? Or do you want to have excellent students be super excellent and kind of start training them to win a Nobel Prize from the age of 7? I think that is a trade-off. I actually think both of them you can explain in proposition why that is very important. But those are all kind of different points and different things you can think about. I was also thinking, if you think of the context, so just kind of very, and maybe that's more mechanistic wise, but just very basic. Okay, so you're a teacher. There's 30 kids in the classroom. I don't know how many kids are in the classroom in Russia, but there's 30 kids in the classroom. Some of them read super fast. Some of them read quite slow. There's no way of knowing what you're going to do. So you always have to go to the middle. That means you're always going to have to take the average. If the kids are more similar to each other, that average is going to fit them a lot better, which just basically means that they are either not going to get bored or they're going to learn more. And it's kind of thinking very specifically through those contexts and through the examples there, I think also helps in explaining the arguments and mechanizing the arguments. Okay, so I say we try this again and we do another one, which is maybe a little bit more difficult. Yeah, okay, so this is a motion that was debated at EUDC Warsaw, which is a long time ago, but I'm an old debater. So this house would require the economic policies of political parties to be approved by an independent panel of experts before being used in campaigns. And we're going to do closing opposition. And we do the same thing as we did last time. We take 5 or 6 minutes and just come up with as many points as possible. And then we'll discuss. Is that okay?
Yeah, can you send the motion to the chat?
Yeah. Done. Okay, I'll set the timer for 5 minutes. Okay, so that was 5 minutes. Does someone want to give their arguments that they came up with? I'll wait for a volunteer.
Okay, I can do. I'm not very good at economic motions, so I have came up with 2 basic points. Well, first of all, not sure how it actually works, but I believe that experts in this field who check out the policies, they have certain like patterns of how economy should actually work in the country, and their task basic is to minimize the risks, like the risk that this policy can fail and stuff like that. And if they think that, for example, this policy that is being introduced is unstable somehow, they're probably going to change it or to adopt it to the existing metrics which are already proven. And it's important, I think, to explain in this debate why those changes are actually important, like introducing new approaches to policies. And I've came up with 2 reasons for that. Well, first of all, because the economic parties who are introducing their policies, they're more likely to come up with a new approach, which is not going to be banned or somehow changed. And it has the chance to be proven, and we never know whether it is going to be a failure or not. Maybe in this particular society, in this particular economy, it's just going to fit in. And the other point about like democracy, and I guess it's somehow on the principle level, because people need to have the options to choose the economic policy of their country. And since everything is being changed and adopted into a certain matrix, it becomes very difficult to do it.
Yeah, I think that's very good. I actually think the second point is like quite a complicated point to come up with, but I think yeah, I think it's a very smart point. So I think that's very good. So yeah, I think that's already a very good start. So you kind of start with actors who are the experts who are going to do this. I think what you say is very true. It's very likely that I don't know, Harvard educated professors are going to do this, who use the same logic they've always used and who prefer things that we know work rather than things that might work. I think the same goes for the type of group that's going to come up with. It's going to be quite an elitist group who's going to come up with policies for the entire country, or kind of measure the policies for the entire country. I think you're right to say on a principle level, maybe economics is not the most important, and the way we measure economics is not fair. Like a lot of economics people will focus on GDP growth or something like that, but maybe equality is a better measurement. So there's a lot of subjective ways that we're going to deal with this, and a lot of subjective ways that might have issues. I think what else did I write down? Oh yeah, I think you can talk a little bit about voters, what it's going to do for them, so that economic policy is all of a sudden going to be super important. It's very difficult to say, well, I disagree with the experts, I'm going to vote something else. Well, we do that with climate change all the time. But I think that there's an argument to be made that economics is going to be much more important than other things, than other policy topics, which might be equally important, like, I don't know, the more social justice things, or climate change, or war, or education, or healthcare. All of that stuff might become less important because of these magic economic policy calculations, and that it might still not be very understandable for people who vote and don't have an economic background. So I think that there's a lot going on there, but I think especially, as you say, like, I'm not an economist. I'm not sure everything that economists are going to do. I think if you kind of stick to the list, so you think of who are going to do this, what are the people that are going to be involved, that has politicians, it has experts, it has voters, all of those people might be influenced by this. What's going to happen principally, so it kind of, the principle behind this argument and proposition is saying there's an objective economy that we can measure, predict, and there is objectively good economic policy and objectively bad economic policy. I think there's a lot to be said there. There's a principle there that says the economy is different from all other topics. If you ask a bunch of gender experts, maybe they have very good ideas about women's rights, right? So why is the economy so important? What does that with the voters, and how does that change the way they think? I think there is something on the long term, which basically is we're only going to do very risk averse policies, so we might not have the radical change in climate change or whatever that we need. So if you kind of stick to these, even if you don't really know what's going on the economy, I'm not an economist myself, but it makes it easier to come up with ideas, and then out of that long list you pick something during the debate, because that brings me to my third part of the training, and that is, how do you pick an extension, and how do you come up with an extension in the debate? So I think the most important thing is, as I said, the goal of the extension is to further the debate, but that is not static. So I think, one, you want to make sure that you weigh your extension. And I think very often people are like, oh, they talked about this group that I think is very important, and they already talked about the kids who are failing in school or who are doing really well in school, and I wanted to talk about that. But that is all something you can come up with and you can weigh yourself. So very often at the end of prep, after the 5 minutes or 7 minutes that we talked about all of the points we can come up with, then we start ranking, and we kind of say, okay, the easiest point to win with is this point. So the easiest point in this house would ban drugs, and the proposition is there's going to be less addicted people. Fine. And then the second easiest point is there's going to be less users. So then you think, okay, what if opening government already talks about addicted people? How do we explain that this is not a debate about people who are addicted? This should be a debate about people who are kind of recreational users and who might be able to stop. And then maybe that's because that group is a lot bigger. There's a lot more people who use drugs for fun than who are addicted. There's a lot more people who kind of, I don't know, the effect on society is a lot larger because people who are addicted are a little bit more isolated. So people who are addicted are very often don't live with their spouses anymore, whereas people who are recreational users might use violence against them. Like, there's all of these reasons that you can come up with. So the group of people who are users is bigger, the group of people who are affected by users is bigger, the influence on society as a whole, on how safe people feel, is a lot bigger. You can come up with all of these reasons, and that is why the users are more important than the addicts. And then for addicts, you think, okay, why are addicts more important than users? They are affected a lot more. They create most of the problems. They have the biggest health risks. They are least happy, stuff like that. And then you explain why they are more important than users. So kind of you just come up with reasons why this is the most important argument. And you do that for all of the points that you have, and you rank them from 1 till 7. And you come up with why each individual point beats out all of the other points. And of course, sometimes you'll have a first half who's very often has English as a first language, who's able to go through 7 arguments in 7 minutes and do that really fast and really well. Then you panic a little bit, or at least I panic a little bit. But then even people usually don't have time to explain both the argument and why it is so important. So focus then on why certain arguments are very important. But yeah, as I said, I think what you need to do in prep, that is something you do in prep, you prioritize your extension and you already come up with how that extension is going to win the debate and how that extension is going to lead to the best improvement of the debate. And I think people very often forget that and kind of have to make that up as they go. But I'll usually have a list of reasons why group 1 is more important than group 2, why group 2 is more important than group 1. Because the thing is, it doesn't really matter. Whatever argument you have to run, you have to explain why that wins. So I'll have like 7 different reasons who are very contradictory, but that doesn't matter because I'm only going to run one of those. I think the second thing you want to think about is, and I know a lot of people hate that, but here's the thing, I don't care. I think the second thing you want to think about is kind of how you're gonna wash first half. So what I mean by a wash is very often first half, both in the education round, right? There's an argument on proposition that says if children who have more difficulty with school are put into a class with kids who do really well in school, that might mean that they become less confident because they never get the highest grade, they always struggle, they are always at the bottom of the class. If we put them together, then sometimes they do get the highest grade. So kind of they get more confident because compared to their direct peers, they do well or they don't do well, but at least they kind of are equal to the others and are able to do well sometimes, and then the other classmate does well the other time, which is good for their confidence. And then opening opposition says, well, actually, you put children in the dumb class, which is really bad for their confidence. They're going to feel like they're dumber. They're going to feel like they are not good enough, and that's really bad for their confidence. So I would stand up in second half and it'd be like, look, judges, I'm very happy I don't have to judge this debate because probably, maybe, both are a little bit true. So some kids might respond the way prop says, some kids might respond the way op says. I don't really know how to solve that. I think that is just something that is true. I don't know. What I'm going to talk about is how we're going to make sure that most children are able to read. And I'm going to talk about the educational style that we need for that. And I'm going to focus on how kids need more attention and we need to go slower. And it's fine if that means they don't get more advanced stuff, because the most important is that they're very good at reading and they're able to do basic math. And everything that the smarter class is going to do, they don't need as much because they're probably not going to do it. But if we put them in an average class, they might not be able to read at the end of it, right? Or the other way around, where you say, well, the first half says it's important to focus on the needs of individual children. That is better done in a classroom. Opposition says, well, but now the smarter kids can help, and otherwise the kids who are in the lower class are not going to do very well because they don't get attention and because they don't get education, blah, 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 or they don't get good teachers. And then in second half, you're like, well, I don't know, difficult. Oh, quality of education, so difficult to measure. You know what's really important? Confidence. And I'm going to explain why confidence gets better on our side. So whilst you should never stab your first half, and I think you should always be nice to your first half, because of course you're on the same bench, I think you do have the ability to kind of say, well, there's an argument pro and against confidence. I don't know, in second half, and just kind of walk away from that a little bit. I want to, again, don't stab your first half. Don't say their arguments are not true. Just say, well, they are definitely right, but maybe so is opposition. So I don't really know how to judge that. So I'm going to focus on a different part. And I think if you do that, it becomes a lot easier to put yourself into the debate, because you're like, well, there's this unclarity in first half. But me and my team partner in second half, they had this really nice extension, which fit very well. But again, like, make sure that you at least impact it. I think that is most important. So you say, well, even if proposition wins the confidence clash, it's more important to have good quality of education. So you immediately already know that. And that can also happen if you do an analysis extension. Sometimes the team before you has done so much that you don't really know what you can add. If that is the case, you run an analysis extension. You're like, well, I'm going to explain this a little bit better, and that's fine. But I think then you also have to explain why that particular part is so important. Because very often people are like, well, I said a new mechanism. Okay, fine, but everyone already knew. So if that's the case, I think on the example on confidence that I gave earlier, so are kids more confident if they have like classmates who are similar, or if they are in a normal class, or like an average class, rather than the less good class? You say, well, I think the way you solve that wash is by explaining whether children compare themselves more against the people who are sitting in the exact same classroom as you, or whether children compare themselves against other classrooms, against the entire school, against their siblings more. Because if they compare themselves more against their individual classmates, like the people they sit next to during math, then it's very likely that proposition wins. If they compare themselves more against the school or the status adults give the classroom, then it's very likely that opposition wins. But then you explain like why that one particular point of analysis, why that one explanation is going to increase the quality of proposition that much. Yeah, so I think that's it. Does that make sense for everyone?
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so what I'm going to propose now is that we do a motion again, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes to come up with as many points as you want, and then I'll give you 5 minutes to come up with the ranking of everything, so explain why one point goes over the other point. So what I would expect is everyone to have a list of 5 or 4 arguments that you could run in this one particular argument, or in this one particular debate, and that you also have reasons why that one argument is more important than all of the others. And again, it is fine if those contradict, because you're only going to run one of these arguments. Does that also make sense? So you'll have 10 minutes total, but I'll say at 5 minutes that you have 5 minutes left, so you should move on to to ranking and prioritizing. Okay. I promised I would not do any international relations, so I'm just looking for a motion. Okay, we'll do Yeah, okay, we'll do this motion. And we will be, what will we be? We'll be proposition. And I am posting the motion in the chat right now. So again, 10 minutes, 5 minutes until I say that you have to move on to prioritizing and ranking. Hello, that is 10 minutes. So I propose we just kind of, just either of you want to run through their arguments and explain their ranking. Masha, I feel like you've gone first every time, so
Yeah, I
don't
can
break
do.
down.
Only first?
Oh, okay, that's also fine.
I think, Masha, you can.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So I've came up with the 4 arguments in this motion. First of all, it's important, I guess, to explain why those people even share these pictures. In most cases, it is done to get a lot of attention in the social media. In most cases, it's also about bragging or showing off, because each and every person wants to show the best version of themselves in the media, since it's a great platform to do so, and to show that they're living their best lives. And a lot of bad impacts actually come from this. The first one, which I've put on the first place as the least impactful and the least important, I guess, is actually how it impacts those people who post these pictures, because they want attention, and this attention is not always a good thing. Because when you post this provocative content, you will be probably discussed in the comments, and there are a lot of haters and people who oppose seeing a lot of private stuff or think that it's inappropriate somehow in the media. So there is going to be a lot of shit posting in the comments, and you will probably feel a little bit unsatisfied because you get this attention, but this attention is not about like you're great, you're beautiful, but there are going to be people who dislike this, and you will get some harm from it. Another point here is that a lot of private content can be leaked or sent to the people you don't want to see them. For example, if you post something on Instagram, it may be screenshotted or sent to your parents or to your coworkers, and thus you will have larger and worse impacts. For example, you are going to be fired, or you will have the argument with your parents because you post such things. And this argument is already more important than the first one, because the impacts and the harm you get is much more worse, and the risks and the consequences that you are going to face is worse, basically. However, these 2 arguments are also less important because it impacts the other group of people, and thus we come up with the third argument. It's actually about inappropriate content that is going to be seen by the other users, who search through Instagram and other social media. In most cases, it's about youth. It's about teenagers, who are the main audience of Instagram. And the point here is, if the first 2 arguments and impacts can be avoided, for example, you stop posting your content, you stop sharing it, and thus you avoid this bad impacts. This thing, when you're a user and you see it constantly on your Instagram, it is unavoidable because you are, as a teenager, constantly see it and scroll the media, right? And the impacts are much worse. Why? Because it also provocates the teenagers to post the same content because they want to be cool, they want to have this great, beautiful pictures, and it always in most cases, it provocates them to actions which are not appropriate for their age. And thus we have a lot of children who post inappropriate content. Well, the consequences may be discussed more. And actually, we do realize that it's more important than the first two arguments, but coming to the fourth argument here, is the fact that it actually makes other people feel bad about themselves. So if when we talk about the children, it's only one group of people, this argument is more important because it involves nearly all the users of the media, because it's also unavoidable, but the scale is basically much larger here. And when we talk about this audience, the people who see it on social media and feel bad about themselves, why does it happen? Well, basically because you see this beautiful life, you see a lot of pictures about like intimate stuff, and you realize, for example, that you're so bad that you don't have the boyfriend, or you don't have this perfect body, or you don't have this much money. And well, it's important to realize that all those users who share these pictures and who become popular are actually indeed living their best lives and having a lot of money, but other people and most users of the social media, they don't have all of it, and they will inevitably face some maybe depression or maybe some sort of a lowering their self-esteem because they see it. And I believe this argument is much more important than all the others because it involves the harms to each and every user of social media, and the scale is large, and the impacts are pretty bad. That's it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, do you have any additions? Because I think it's a very good list, but what would you do if the fourth argument is already made in the first half? So the argument on how other users feel really bad and they don't realize that it's like rich people who photograph only what is fun or only what is nice rather than their realistic lives, stuff like that. Let's say they already made that argument. Opening government explained that very, very, very well. There's a very good first speaker and they've explained all of how would you deal with that? I know it's a difficult question, but presumably in the same way that you come up with that argument and think it's the most important, a lot of first halves will also come up with that argument and think it's the most important. So they might focus on that, and then you don't really know how to win. So I think that the second part of the prioritization, which I think you did already really well, I think that is to explain why even the lower ranked things that you would rather not run are still able to win the debate. So in this case, you might say, the people who see it on Instagram are affected a lot less than those who post it, who get many comments, who see that picture. So the people on Instagram might feel a little bit worse, and they're like, oh, I don't really like it. But they realize that that one picture on the yacht with a cocktail is probably not how most people live their lives. But the people who post those pictures get a lot of pressure on themselves. They're the type of people that get hate on the internet. They're the type of people that get pictures leaked on the internet. They're the type of people that have all of that different stuff. And I think that explains why these might be affected a lot more than the average user, and might even win against the argument on the average user, right? So you go back and you're like, hey, opening government talked about the average user. I'm going to talk about all of the people that actually post the content and create the content and how they are affected by this sharing culture and how they are going to be viewed and how they feel pressure to give up their privacy, how they are going to be judged, how they feel the pressure to have like a really nice life, stuff like that. and how that affects them so much more than the people who are like scrolling through Instagram and maybe think, oh, my life's a little bit boring. So I think even if opening government brings the fourth point, you still have to be able to bring an extension and explain why your extension is more important than that. Because otherwise it doesn't really matter, right? It's kind of like, oh, there's one argument, that argument always wins. If opening government makes it, opening government wins. And if opening government doesn't make it, closing government wins, which I think is not the way the game works. So you have to think of other ways of winning the debate, even if the most important argument according to you is the argument that you're not going to be able to make because opening have already made it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Cool. Do you want to do another try, or do you want to discuss this more, or what do you think would be useful right now? Okay, we can do one more try, and then we'll just do one more prep, and we'll do the same thing. So as I said, again, it's good that you already ranked it. I thought the ranking was very good, and the explanation of the ranking was very good. And now the next step is that you're able to explain that even for the arguments that in the real world might be less important, why they are going to be more important in the debate, and you can explain how they actually do win within the debate, even if the best argument is already made by first half. Okay, so this is an easy one, I think, or at least like doesn't have an info slide. So we're going to be opposition. And the motion is, this house believes that states should significantly fund female-only tech companies. So again, 10 minutes. I'm going to warn you after 5, and then I'm going to warn you after 10, and then we'll see. So come up with all of the points, rank and prioritize the points, explain why even the points lower on the priority list still could win the debate. Okay, good luck. Okay, that was about 10 minutes. Oh. So, Masha, do you want to go first again and explain the points you had?
Okay, I will try. Okay, not sure about the ranking, but still I've came up with a couple of points which are actually interconnected between each other. The first one is about basic backlash from men in tech, because we do realize that there are companies and big tech companies who thus won't probably receive this money. And the fact that they see that the companies where women work, it actually worsens the perception of those women. Well, it's kind of difficult to prove, I guess, but it's still possible that this man would actually feel that they are less privileged than women, because women have now better conditions of work, they have better instruments to do their job, and their companies become more prosperous just because they get money from the government. So they kind of feel excluded, and it only worsens the perception of women at work, because now you feel that this feminist movement is again only just discriminates men and stuff like that. It's one point. The other point which I find a little bit more important probably is the fact that the whole problem is becoming vague. Because it now becomes not only difficult to perceive women as like equal workers and perceive them as equal on the basic level. I, as a manager, for example, of a big tech company, don't get now why I need to hire a woman to my company and integrate her to my job, because I do realize that she can go now to this very cool female-only tech companies which are being funded and all that stuff. So I won't do it. I would hire a man, and it's actually a much more worse problem, because now the women will have to go to women-only companies which are probably not very big and not very large and don't have this very good and great opportunities. And the most important thing here that I find it's about the basic progress in tech, because in the world of government, it probably won't be achieved. Because we need to, because what we do in government, we basically try to bring them on the same level instead of thinking about this progress. Because if we fund, for example, big tech companies, also not only just women companies, there is going to be more progress because big tech companies will need to have a large variety of workers because they're going to be widening in their scale and in their jobs. So they're probably going to be hiring more people, and including women, because we already see in status quo that right now there are a lot of diversity and inclusion programs in business, and a lot of companies pursue the idea of gender equality. And thus, when women actually start working with men on the same level, men are able to see that women are actually capable of doing something, because when the women stay in these very small companies which are being funded, right, they cannot be integrated into the workplace of men, and thus their achievements cannot be seen by other people, not just by women. Something like that.
I muted myself again, but I thought that was very good. I think it's a difficult motion. Are there any additions? Yeah, I get that it's difficult. So I think now you did a lot more on the prioritizing and explaining and weighing, but don't forget to still think of the different actors. So I think there's also an argument about the users here. So maybe this creates less competition, which means that there is less quality. I don't know if that's true, but I think there's an argument to be made that given that tech is highly competitive right now, if one kind of can get funding just by hiring women, it might mean that they're not going to work as hard to do really well. And that certain small startups that are created by men always get outcompeted, so cannot grow, and therefore the quality for users becomes less. And I think that kind of also thinks of the principle, something on fair competition, why that's important, and what that has to do with everything. And yeah, I think what you did for women was really well. So you kind of talk about women in these particular companies, women who work at other companies, the men who work at these other companies. So I thought that was really well and really good. And I think then obviously the difficult thing is because everyone's probably going to agree. So everyone's going to say the most important thing is getting women in tech. I'd say it's kind of remains a difficult balance to explain why your particular mechanism is most important. But I think that's what would win you the debate in second half if you're like, okay, but sure, everything the first half talks about is probably a little true. But the thing that stops women from participating in tech most is this one thing, and that's going to be worse because of this. And explain that really well. And just don't forget to always explain why a particular argument is so important and immediately put it into the debate. So going back to the introduction I gave at the beginning, I think it's important to remember that extension should be summarized within a sentence, and it should be clear how you're putting it into the debate. So what we're talking about now, like how do you prioritize one argument over the other, that is something that you should always include with an extension to make sure that the judges weigh it correctly against your first half. A couple of things that you can think about when you're coming up with an extension are the actors, splitting up the actors to more specific groups, what's going to happen on the long term, the context in which this happens, just kind of like running through it in your head, what this actually looks like, examples that you have of where this happened in the world and what happened there, because that helps you come up with arguments, principles, or kind of broader concepts also help. And then you make this extension winning by weighing it against your first half, and when necessary, creating a wash in the first half and saying, look, there's arguments on both sides. So that's kind of a summary of everything we did today. Are there any questions on extensions or debate in general? Because we have 20 minutes left. I'm fine with saying this is the end of the training, but if you want to ask questions, that's also fine by me.
Well, I can ask one question. It's probably about this way and comparison the principles and utilitarian metrics, because if the first table is talking about some impacts and harm on the society in general, and you're on the closing part, you're just saying, like, we have this idea, this principle, and how to explain that it's actually important than the sufferings of people.
Yeah, I think that's often very difficult, right? Because we often say, how do you put a principle into the debate? I actually think principles are put into the debate the same way utilitarian things are put into the debate, because very often principles are a harm to a right. So I think when you say there's a right to privacy, or there's a right to equality, or a right to whatever you want to have a right to, then we harm that one particular principle. So I think when we say, well, we harm privacy if we look into the text messages of people we think might be terrorists, but then you weigh that against the actual kind of physical utilitarian harms of how someone feels when a terrorist attack happens. And I think then you run through the same analysis. So what happens when you harm privacy? People might feel unsafe. People feel harassed. People feel scared. People feel bad or embarrassed or whatever. That feeling or is also quite tangible, right? So you can then weigh that off. So rather than just saying, well, there's a right and there's like a principle to whatever, you weigh the harm that we do to that right, the way we ignore that right, against all other rights in the debate. So there's a right to life. Okay, why is that more important than something else? Well, because if we don't have the right to life, then A, B, C, D happens, which means that something else happens, right? So you can always just weigh them in the same way that you weigh practical arguments, by looking at the effect on the actual right. And most utilitarian things are also based on rights. Like if we say, oh, people get more poor, that's based on their right to food, right? So, or their right to education, or the right to. So, even if something sounds a little bit more fluffy, I think you're still able to weigh them off against the more practical stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, cool. Okay, so that's the end of this training. Thank you very much. I think there's going to be, well, I know there's going to be another training in 15 minutes and an hour. So I'm trying to convert it to Russian time, which I obviously don't have here, but I'm looking at the schedule. There's going to be another training at
4.
4. Yes,
Yeah.
There's going to be another training at 4. So I hope I'll see you there. And I'll see you then. And thank you so much for joining, and good luck in the last debate or last round of trainings. And I hope you learned a lot and it helped.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.